Okay, so in a soul retrieval, what we do is we're out of body or we're in a lucid dream state, and we simply request to do a retrieval. Then 90% of the time, we're transported through a tunnel to a new location where there's usually an isolated spirit, and it's usually a fairly low vibrational astral realm. And all we have to do with the early stage retrievals is we simply strike up a conversation with the spirit, and that usually livens that spirit up enough that they then recognize that there are helpers nearby to whisk them away off to what I call a heaven plane, or in Monroe terminology, Focus 27.
Welcome. I'm here with Michael Lee. Michael, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. So just tell us about yourself.
So I am a few different things. So I'm a scientist by day. I have a PhD in physical chemistry from California, Berkeley. And my day job, I work for the US government as a scientist. I used to do computational chemistry, and then I moved into doing machine learning research in the last 10 years.
Very interesting. My son's looking at doing, I think, computational physics. So
yeah, it's a lot of fun. What's interesting is that when you go to a chemistry conference, what you find is that 90% of the people there are experimental chemists and 10% are computational. I think in the physics realm, there may be a little bit more on the computational side because some things are just simply impossible to do, like black holes and wormholes. So there ends up being more theoretical physics out there. So it is kind of a niche. However, this niche has now won 3 Nobel Prizes in the last, I'd say, like 20 years. The first one for quantum chemistry, another one for computational chemistry or the simulation of biomolecules. And then recently, I believe it was last year, it was using AI to design proteins to have specific functions. So one idea would be...
I was about to ask you, that was my next question about AI. Keep going. Sorry.
Yes. So what happened was last year, there was a guy named David Baker. He used a little bit of AI, but the other guy that I think was Demis Hassabis, he was part of DeepMind, he used a lot of AI. And they both have really pushed the field forward for computational design of proteins. And what does that mean? I mean, so one idea is the development of synthetic life forms. Another idea is the ability to create enzymes that can perform chemical processes that are a lot more energy efficient than the ones that we currently use. One of the great examples that still needs to be worked on is how to convert nitrogen in the air into ammonia, which would greatly reduce energy costs and provide all the chemistry we need for daily life. Another area where protein design could come in handy could be in disease. For example, we could imagine almost designing proteins to either kill off bacteria or viruses, or potentially act as scaffolds for implants and stuff like that. So I moved out of the biology and chemistry area about 10 years ago. But yeah, I used to work in that area. I used to do things like trying to find small molecules that could fit into a protein pocket to inhibit that protein. And we worked on a lot of infectious diseases where we were looking for small molecule inhibitors. So that was all computational. And then, of course, recently I've been working more in the machine learning area. And the thing there is that my mission has been, how many different ways can we use machine learning to help the government solve different problems? I've published work in using it to solve, like looking for detection of cybersecurity incidents. I've used it for detection of fractures in materials. Virtually anything you could imagine, machine learning could potentially be applied. One of the challenges is that you have to have a lot of data in order to train your machine learning model. So right now, I think there's a big push within the government to take advantage of these language models to see if it can help improve government processes. And I imagine that, other parts of the government are interested in, other aspects of how it could be used.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Now, do you work at like a national lab, or do you like where are you based? Just like
So I work for
geographically, where you
I
based?
work for the Army Research Lab, and
Okay.
our general mission is to do basic research, but there's been a lot more pressure on us in the last few years to spend more time trying to make sure that our scientific discoveries are transitioning through into things like weapon systems and sensors and all that good stuff. So
Where's the Army Research Lab based?
so I'm based in Maryland. So there's two locations in
Okay.
Maryland, and then there's a few like satellite locations elsewhere for ARL. And these days, yeah, I mean, there's also the Air Force Research Laboratory, which is based mostly in Ohio and a little bit of New York, and then Naval Research Laboratories mostly in DC. So yeah, a lot of the government funding for this research ends up kind of centralized in a certain location. But you'd be surprised. A lot of research, at least within the military, is done, I would say, by the prime contractors. I think they get a huge bulk to do research and development. So it's really up to the government labs to work hard to kind of get our ideas out there to the prime contractors to get them to use the ideas that we discovered in the lab. So, and that's an ongoing challenge. But generally speaking, I really enjoy machine learning research. Even I, though, have been surprised by the ascent of AI, in these language models and stuff like that. But I also have a pretty good understanding of how they work. And I'm always thinking about how they could be modified or applied to, for example, doing computational research, because some of it can be pretty tedious. Like I joke about having an AI that could be like a digital intern. So, and I have a recent tech report that I'll be publishing talking about, what are the missing ingredients in current AI that need to be filled in order to make those more automated agents a reality.
Yeah, because it's not very good at math. That's the one thing that I noticed.
It's funny, it's good at math concepts, but it's not good at necessarily like arithmetic or something like that.
Correct.
And yeah. So that it's still, but it can call different tools and do things. It can make up for some of its weaknesses by calling tools. Yeah.
And when you say by calling tools, it's like writing code and things like that.
Yeah, it can write like a little piece of Python code to actually do the calculation. One of the tests that I always give AI is find me words that add up to the number 50. And where A equals 1, B equals 2. So it does a fairly good job of the arithmetic of adding up the words, but it kind of randomly goes through and tries out different words. And the reasoning models seem to do the best because they iterate and iterate and iterate until they find some words. So that's sort of my test of, how thoughtful is the language model currently. I also, it's funny, asked the language model a very tricky question because I had developed a chemistry method about 20 years ago. And I asked Grok, who were the original developers of this method? And it spent pages and pages trying to think it through, and eventually got the right answer. But a lot of language models end up getting the wrong answer, a review paper that was published a few years later. So the credit for me kind of gets diluted by AI if we're not careful. And that can happen to any of us. I don't know if you've had a chance to ask AI about yourself, if it knows anything yet.
It's gotten better. But the first time I think I ever asked, I was a left-wing anarchist living in Virginia with a PhD, and I'd written 3 anarchist books, it was complete. It was like the opposite of
so it just made up this whole story about all these books. Does it make you want to go write those books?
No, they're books I would never write.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was like a year and a half ago. Now it's fairly accurate. And I've scared guests that I did background research on using the deep dive function on ChatGPT. And it would just find really obscure sources. And I would ask the guest, because I don't read AI bios for guests without talking. I just don't do that. But I also will ask the guest, is before the interview, is this true? Yeah. And recently they'll be like, yeah. I'm like, well, I never heard of this source. And they'll be like, oh, that's the local newspaper or something like that. They did an interview for, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah. My name is very common. Yeah. So what that means for me is sort of like internet and anonymity. A few years back, I tried to become famous being a singer-songwriter, but I incorrectly chose the moniker of simply Dr. Michael Lee, which might as well pull up like 100 different hits. So, or 100 different songs or 100 different websites, of medical doctors and stuff like that. And I'm not even the most cited Michael Lee in science. I'm like the second or third most cited. So there's some Michael Lee in Australia, with a PhD. And when I go through my Google Scholar, which is something, scientists have, showing all their publications, I'm always having to prune it with other Michael Lees that are getting on my list. But if you check it out these days, it should be pretty clean. It's funny when I first started out doing, because I've been doing, my spiritual stuff for about 25 years. I used to just not even talk about it. I would have I was anonymous on the internet because I didn't want to. But these days, whatever, I put it out there and nobody cares. So,
well, I mean, the Army was doing remote viewing. Like I talked I talked to most of them. So like, what are they going to do? Say like, you can't do the thing that we say doesn't exist, even though we spent $20 million on it. Like,
but then it makes you question, like, for example, are they still doing it? Because that's one of the...
They're absolutely still doing it. They're absolutely still.
Yeah, I don't consider myself a remote viewer in that regard, but I do get to have lots of cool experiences when I'm dreaming. I guess maybe they don't want somebody that sleeps on the job, so maybe that's why they didn't recruit me.
Well, so I can also give you some insight into that. I think they tried using OBEs as well. Mm-hmm. And what I've been told, I think David Morehouse told me this, so it's one source, but David Morehouse was in the program. And they said that when they tried OBEs, it wasn't as useful for intelligence gathering because once somebody went out of body, they would kind of get distracted and go somewhere else and do other things, whereas they could control it a little bit more with remote viewing. So anyway, that's a good point. That's a good point. And that gets to this idea that in an OBE state or a lucid dreaming state, it's almost like our brain is at like half capacity. So it's not in a good state of mind. Okay, great. Yeah, let's go there. So I had no idea about your day job background, which I think only adds to your credibility, which I think this is going to be pretty interesting. How did you get into the spiritual side?
Okay, so I'll tell you my can story. So basically, I started my postdoc back in 2000, and I moved to San Diego, turned on the TV set, and there was the Sci-Fi Channel, and John Edward was one of the shows crossing over. I had, up to that point, I had a terrible fear of death and suffered from depression. And, so it's just a terrible mix. You put the anxiety of death with depression. It's wonderful. I watched the show for a while. I thought it was intriguing. I then got his book out of the library, which was, I don't remember the name of it, but it was written before he became famous. So it was written, fairly humbly and talked about his development as a medium, about how he wanted proof about like when his mom passed over from other mediums. After reading that book, I said to myself, there's three possibilities. One is he's lying and he's just trying to sell books. That didn't seem likely, just given how humble he was in that book. Mm-hmm. Number two, he was deluding himself. In other words, he believed he was picking up, people from beyond. And number three is that he was telling the truth. And I decided from that point it sounds like he's just telling the truth. Mm-hmm. So I followed an exercise in the back of his book, which is a little bit like remote viewing, and that seemed pretty positive. I then went online, and back in 2000, internet was a lot more sparse. I found something called out-of-body experiences. I had never heard of them before. I clicked on a link, and I ended up on Robert Peterson's site. And Robert Peterson writes books on how to have out-of-body experiences. His first book he put on for free on the internet, so I was able to sit there and read it each day. They look like blog entries. In each chapter, he would describe some of the experiences, and at the end of each chapter, he would give a method. And so I started practicing some of the methods that he had in his book. The most important thing is I kept a diary. That is super important when you start doing this stuff. And the reason is about 2 months in, I'm thinking to myself, I haven't really been successful, blah, blah, blah. Well, I started looking back at my diary. I noticed things like I made it to my closet, and then, or this or that happened and all these crazy things happened. I'm like, you know what? This is going to get interesting. What really helped me along, though, and what kind of separates me from other people that start to practice this, is that I already knew how to lucid dream. And so lucid dreaming back then meant that I would become lucid. And then I was thinking about, oh, I want to do an out of body experience. I would switch focus back to my body sleeping in bed. And while there, I was still asleep, but I was sort of what they say is body
Mind
asleep,
awake, body asleep.
mind awake, mind awake, body asleep, exactly. And that is a perfect form for getting into an out of body state. Now, of course, the trick is how do you get out of body from there? But sometimes, like I said, I would just kind of force myself and end up in the closet because the closet was right in front of my bed. And then I started having just interesting experiences. Like somebody came to me very early on and gave me some sort of download. I didn't even know what that was back then. And then other times I would find myself already in an interesting looking environment and I would start looking around. So for a few years there, I was doing the habit of becoming lucid, switching my mind back to my bed, and then going out of body that way. And I would do various experiments, like I would go try to get into the living room and see where the furniture was located. And what I found was that sometimes the furniture was in a different position than what I had originally put it in, but it was almost like in a future position or in a past position. So it seemed like it was more like residual memories of reality. Another interesting experience I had early on is I saw an object near my bed and I immediately interpreted it as something. I saw it as something, and when I woke up, it was something else. And I learned early on that out-of-body experiences are very hard to get good validation. So one of the things that people try to do sometimes is they'll take a playing card and put it face down, like against a door. And then when you go out of body, you look at the playing card. The problem, of course, is that when you look at the playing card, it's not necessarily going to be what it actually is because your mind can modify it really easily. I think the best proof I had early on is that if you're still sort of within your body, but you stick your spirit hands into the ground, you can feel things like the carpet tacks under the carpet and stuff like that. So I would say that you get like a more real experience if you don't move too far away from your body. But in any case, they were all interesting experiences and mind-blowing. It's interesting because I've met two people that had lots of out-of-body experiences, but thought, you know what, this is still inside my head. Now, one guy, I don't know what he's been up to the last 20 years, but he's a famous psychologist. The other guy was a friend of mine, and he started doing experiments with the University of Virginia. And they would set up an empty room with an object at the center. And so they asked him to go visit these rooms. And he visited the room, told the experimenters what he got. And apparently he got enough things correct that it just like changed him from a skeptic to a believer. And it actually kind of spooked him. And he even kind of stopped doing OBEs for a little bit because he felt like, well, now if OBEs are real, then all those spirits I see are real spirits and they're kind of scary. So he kind of shied away from it for a little bit. For me, the proof came a little bit later, but let me explain first. One of the major transitions for me was I started reading. So at first I had read the books by Robert Monroe, which were a nice follow-on to Robert Peterson, who...
Yep, I've read those too.
Yeah. And then I started reading some books by a guy named Bruce Moen. Bruce Moen is also an engineer, or was also an engineer. So he's a very logical mind. And he had attended the Monroe classes, specifically the Gateway series and the Lifeline series. And the Lifeline series really hit him hard. And that's this idea of doing soul retrievals. Are you familiar with that concept?
A little bit, but why don't you, most of the people in the audience may not be.
Sure. Okay, so in a soul retrieval, what we do is we're out of body or we're in a lucid dream state, and we simply request to do a retrieval. Then 90% of the time, we're transported through a tunnel to a new location where there's usually an isolated spirit, and it's usually a fairly low vibrational astral realm. And all we have to do with the early stage retrievals is we simply strike up a conversation with the spirit, and that usually livens that spirit up enough that they then recognize that there are helpers nearby to whisk them away off to what I call a heaven plane, or in Monroe terminology, Focus 27. That procedure is every once in a while, I'll ask to do a retrieval and the spirit will just be right next to me. So I don't even have to travel anywhere. So that can happen. Another possibility is a retrieval might just occur spontaneously. and I mentioned that recently with another interview, is that I believe that a lot of people in their lifetime will have had a few retrieval experiences in their dreams. Now, why does this happen? The concept is that in the lower astral, helpers and spirit are almost invisible because their energy is coming from the higher planes. And as they descend down the planes, they become dimmer and dimmer. However, human astral projectors or human dreamers have energy coming up from the earth and also our living physical body. And so we literally glow within those lower planes. And so it's very hard for a spirit to miss us. It's pretty rare that a spirit doesn't see me when I'm down there. Now, as the retrieval experiences evolve, you get spirits that are more fearful, that try to run away from you. One thing that I think is pretty cute is I often do a lot of retrievals of children. And what will happen is I'll start approaching the child and the child runs away. So what I do is I start running the opposite direction as though we were playing chase. And then the child runs toward me and then I'm able to grab them. But yeah, I mean, typically I just calm them down. Another thing that you can do as you advance more is you learn how to progress up the subplanes. And so I'm able to hold somebody and progress up the subplanes and take them to at least a high enough subplane that helpers are waiting and can take over from there.
Now, for people who don't know, what is the lower astral? Can you describe that?
Well, as far as I can tell, it's not completely like the descriptions of hell or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But what it reflects are either spirits that are in a very disoriented state, and they could be just fragments of the spirit, not the whole spirit, sort of like what we were saying before, that may not be full mental energy in every fragment. Also, there can be spirits that are more, and I used this term about 5 years ago, more narcissistic, more controlling. And so they kind of go hand in hand with the spirits that are disoriented and that they like to kind of keep them in their group. I think that there are potentially demonic beings, although I'm not 100% sure if demons are their own race of beings or whether they're simply spiritual fragments that have spent a long enough time in the astral that they kind of get distorted by that lack of, we'll call white light energy or love energy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's spooky, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's dangerous. I think the biggest danger that somebody could face exploring those realms is getting a parasitic attachment. I think that if you are someone that is aware of your energy field or know people that are, I don't think that's going to be as much of a risk. Certainly when I go out of body or I have a lucid dream, I can tell right away if there's something stuck to me. The other risk that you could run into in the lower astral plane is that they can almost kind of trap your astral body for a while. And I've had my astral body sort of like trapped for a few days before it's sort of liberated. So it's kind of, they're
Wait, a few days?
Well, but a few days, meaning each time that I went back into the out-of-body state or the lucid, I found myself still in that same realm. So my physical state was fine, but this astral part of me, and this gets to it. Yeah. So what you mentioned about so it turns out that we have all these energy bodies. Now we're not necessarily aware of them, but they're there anyway. So one interesting question is let's say you're next to somebody else and you go out of body and you see the person next to you. What are you seeing? Well, you're actually seeing their astral self. So their astral self could be floating out and about doing things. And the physical person may not realize at all that their astral body is doing all this crazy stuff. One of the funny things for me in the last few years is a lot of people report seeing me in their dreams, and I have no memory of that. So either there's an AI that's, spirit that's trying to replicate me, or it seems that my energy is sort of fragmented a little bit and is off doing crazy things. So.
Okay. So going back to soul retrievals, you were kind of in that process. You said some people do this while they're sleeping and they don't even realize it. Explain how that works and why aren't we aware of it?
So I think, most of us on this planet right now are really not too educated on who we are as beings and our powers. When we dream, this is kind of odd, but I believe it's based on my own experiences, and some people can sort of corroborate this. We dream within a spirit body, but we are placed inside of personalized bubbles with what I would call robot avatars. that carry the dream along with us. You could every once in a while have like a shared dream where it's you and a friend or a family member, but a lot of times they're extras that are playing along with you within the stream. So as far as retrievals, you can imagine that all they're doing then is just simply taking your spirit body and bringing it into one of the lower astral realms to do a retrieval. Now, the other thing that can happen is a nightmare. When we have nightmares, I would argue that a lot of times it's because our spirit body was somehow transported into a really, low vibrational environment. Why? I'm not entirely sure. It could be to learn lessons about how to deal with fear. Who knows? So a lot of stuff is happening to us involuntarily. So when people say things like, oh, you shouldn't learn how to astral project, you're doing the devil's work and blah, blah, blah. Well, it is true that astral projection typically is occurring in these lower vibrational planes. But the argument I would say is that you're doing it anyway when you're dreaming, so you might as well learn how to take control of the situation rather than be, a victim to your dreams and to the experiences that you're being thrown into.
You ever encounter like shapeshifters in the astral plane or dreams?
I've heard about them a lot. Surprisingly, not that frequently. What I do see shapeshift actually occurs on the higher planes, because on the higher planes, we are no longer just that one self from that one lifetime, but we're actually like souls with multiple personalities. And so there I see a lot more shapeshifting as the people interconvert between the personalities from different lifetimes that I may or may not be familiar with. So yeah, that's actually ironically where I see more shapeshifting. Yeah. And I can, of course, change my form a little bit, although I don't know how to change like my face or anything like that. But I can. And sometimes when I do a retrieval, they actually put a costume on me so that I look more familiar to the spirit that I'm working with. Like one time.
I had a dream once like that where there was somebody I recognized, but for some reason I knew it wasn't that person. And I called them out. I said, come on, dude. And they're like, oh, and they got really scared. Whatever it was, got really terrified. And was like, oh, let me show you how to do this. It's just shape-shifting. And then it
These could be the robotic AIs. It's funny, I haven't used this term until recently, but I think that there's little miniature clones, not just of us, but just of humans in general, that are used to populate our dreams. Because if all we had were dreams with like odd-looking beings, we'd go crazy. So it's almost like they make things familiar for us so that we can be gullible enough to accept the dream as a dream and not as something strange going on. So I think that, that we may be getting shape-shifting of even our friends and stuff like that, just to make things familiar and to play out the stories that need to be played out. Why it's happening, I don't know if it's 100% benevolent. I don't know about that. I just don't know.
Yeah, I just know whatever it was scared shitless. Was just
they don't like,
boy, I just poked a bear. Whatever I
they don't like being called out. If you start telling them that they're just dream characters, they get really insulted. Yeah. The only time I can tell for sure if it's a demon is if they stick out their tongue and they have like a black tongue. Otherwise, I don't know, who they are. And generally speaking, the astral is not a good place to get useful information. I learned that the hard way, trying to get stock picks and stuff like that. But
the intelligence community, as we were discussing before the call, had the same experience, which is why they do remote viewing and not out-of-body experiences. Yeah,
exactly. Now, I can go to the higher vibrations, but it takes extra effort. It's almost like you said that the waking state, we are better connected with our higher vibrational self than when we're sleeping. When we're sleeping, it seems like we're mostly attached, not everybody, but mostly attached to our lower vibrational beings.
Now, what about these higher vibrational realms? What's your experience with those?
Okay, so a repeating guidepost is what Monroe would call Focus 27, the park. I call it heaven when I retrieve spirits. And it's generally a meeting ground where both fragments can hang out, but souls can be there too. And that's sort of the lowest of what I would also call like the mental plane.
Sorry to interrupt, but what's the difference between a soul and a soul fragment?
Great question. So I'll just use it in terms of me. My soul is made up of memories and potentially avatars of every lifetime that I've currently lived. So think of the soul as an enclosure or even a spiritual world unto itself, containing all of our past lives and potentially future lives. So it's multi-personality, multi-lifetime. The spirit that we have in the astral and the human that we have in this lifetime is just a single personality. People that are really evolved on this planet are able to sort of allow their soul to kind of be part of who they are here. And so they're able to make good decisions because, they have a lot of wisdom. So I'll get into a little bit of that. So one of the areas in the higher realms is a realm where you go into it, and it's basically like all the yous from different lifetimes. So they call me Michael, and they each have names based on their lifetime. So I'll sometimes ask people, or ask in spirit, I'll say, what is my name? And that tells me whether they're seeing me as Michael or if they're seeing me as my soul. And so as the soul, I'm sort of like this, being that's got all these wonderful lifetimes. I have, if you saw in my previous video, I have students who are also souls. And it seems like our soul kind of exists on that higher vibrational plane at all times. Like only a part of it is sort of experiencing this existence here. And a big part of it is just sort of living at that higher plane. So while we're physically here, it's almost like there's two of us, it's not quite a full union.
This is what people refer to as higher self.
Yeah, you could call it higher self. Now, it's interesting because some people would say a higher self is even above that the higher self is like the collection of your soul with your soul family and other soul families related to you. But in any case, yeah, you could call it higher self. And so what's interesting is when people call out for guidance, you will either get your soul guide, which if you happen to be one of my students, it would be me, or more likely you're going to get a past life personality come in and help you out. In other words, the soul is acting like a team and kind of helping team, in your case, Team Sean, to progress in this lifetime. And so they're going to come in different times to help you out. Specifically, there's two things they can help you out with. One is if you're in the spirit world exploring, they can help transport you to different locations based on your requests. And then for everyday life, they may have specific expertise that they can sort of download into you to give you what you need. I theorized that, I was really good in math when I was young. I theorized that I must have had some really strong math personalities that had already lived. And so math just came natural to me. What's interesting is that there reached a point where math got difficult. And my theory is because those past life personalities hadn't attained a certain level of math beyond what was available in their time. So they could get me up to speed on math, geometry, trigonometry, whatnot. But then when it got to these subjects that were developed, let's say in the 20th century, they simply have no reference point. And so they rely then on me to sit down and try to understand these topics. So that's another way to look at it, is that you are, as part of the team for your soul, you are experiencing and learning everything you can given the environment that we live in. Another way to look at it is, let's say you've had a bunch of lifetimes on this planet. How many involved computers? Probably almost zero. So this has really been a unique experience for all of us to get experience with computers, with the fact that knowledge is readily available. If we want to learn a very esoteric topic, odds are there's plenty of information out there about it. In the old days, we were kind of locked in. We learned our trade. We may never have been to a library. So this has really been a great opportunity for expanding our knowledge base in this particular lifetime.
And so you started doing all this in 2000. How did you progress over time? What was that learning curve like?
Yeah, so one thing that increased over time was the frequency of having an out-of-body experience or a lucid dream. The more you do it, it seems to just keep linearly increasing. So I would go from like once, a month to once a week to twice a week, 3 times a week. So, I reached a point where I was almost able to do it every day. The retrievals was a big plus because retrievals opened up doorways in terms of exploring the astral world and understanding a little better what was going on. And I had one particular experience that was really cool. I had my conversation with the fragment, and then the helpers were ready to take that. And there was more than one helper there, just for one person. And I thought, hey, can you take me to where you're taking that other guy? And so he did. He took me there, and I was like, whoa, this is cool. And that was my first experience in, the park or Focus 27. And so what I learned from that experience was that I wanted to try to get there more often. So I used the emotional state that I was in and just the fact that I knew it existed to try to keep pushing myself. So over time, I kept doing retrievals. A lot of times people learn about retrievals, they do it for a little bit and then they stop. I just kept going. And so eventually I reached sort of like what they would call like the highest level of that you could be of a retriever, where you're dealing with, spirits that are like violent or spirits that don't want to go anywhere or they run away really easily. And, I've developed certain techniques to work with them. The other things I've done, you can ask different things. Like I did some experiments where I would visit random people that I didn't know and try to pick up information about them. And this was to help me validate that the experiences were real. I also asked to visit the future. And my most recent thing is that it seems like they've been sending me on some journeys to visit non-human intelligences. So that seems to be like one of my new roles, is interacting with other species. I wonder if in some ways it's sort of like trying to prepare us for that future where humans become part of we'll call it the galactic neighborhood, And so it's funny because one of them said something funny. They said, humans are stupid. And I took offense at that when they said that, because I thought, well, I'm not stupid. And then I thought about it later and I realized, maybe we are,
Collectively, yeah.
Yeah, what do we know exactly? Yeah, so the other thing that I've been doing the last few years is spending a lot more time trying to develop techniques to get me from my dream state up into what I would call the heavenly planes. And I think that this work that I've been doing, I think can be almost kind of like the first thing that I might actually be able to teach people. One of the challenges I've had is because lucid dreaming comes naturally to me, I can't really teach other people how to lucid dream. But on the other hand, as far as having these experiences where you start off in a lucid dream and then you try to progress upward, I've had to experiment with a variety of techniques to see what works. And I find that depending on my state of mind at the time, like almost none of the techniques will work. And it really shows you that even when you start to go out of body and you start to lucid dream, things will go up and down. Like you won't always have like magical experiences. It's sometimes you'll be like, oops, that went too quick, or I didn't make it anywhere that time. I think the one thing I've been blessed with is, like I said, I've been doing this for about 25 years. So I've just managed to collect so many experiences that I hope that other people can start the journey and then just keep collecting experiences over time.
What about precognition in dreams?
Not too much. So I can't remember specific involuntary precognitive dreams. I will say that when my children, in the process of my wife and I having children was very difficult, and we had to do IVF, and it took us about 5 years. And so I did do a lot of sort of early scouting, finding out the spirits that wanted to be my children. And then one particular experience was fairly positive, where my wife had just done IVF for the second time. The first time didn't work. And this was a few days before her pregnancy test. And I saw my son floating above my bed. And I started talking to him, and, I said, because at first he was wondering what I was doing. And I was like, so who are you? And he's like, my name is David. And I'm like, are you going to be our son? He's like, yeah, I'm going to try. And then I woke up and explained that experience to my wife. And then a few days later, she did test positive, and we eventually had a son named David. So that worked out pretty well. A similar experience after my son had been born, he was in the NICU for a few weeks. I went out to visit him, and I saw these two large angels, which for some reason, I picked up the names Grace and Mercy, and I guess they were watching over him. And then I was brought to a room, and this woman explained to me, she said, if you have faith, you will have another child in 1.5 years. And sure enough, about a year and 3/4 later, we had a second child. So those are sort of like, I would say, like my precognitive. Now, I've asked to visit the future a lot of times, and specifically looking for technology and stuff like that. One thing I saw in the future was like something that almost looked like a newspaper, but it was essentially a two-sided tablet. And there are, I think, now two-sided like phones and around, but they're still like, they're not as common. So I would say that's kind of like not a strong hit. What else? Oh yeah, of course, I've dreamt about the future. And it's funny because I haven't watched your videos that much, but it seems to be that after around the year 2060, I don't seem to end up in what somebody would call a year. They call it an epoch. And I'm not sure if that term has been used before, but basically it's described to me as virtual realities. So it seems that in the future, we will start to be able to incarnate into computer simulations rather than physical realities. And My recent interview, it occurred to me that there's two reasons why this might happen. One is because if our population were to suddenly diminish quite a bit, then the opportunities for souls would be reduced. But the other is that it would provide the opportunity for souls to incarnate into adult bodies, because the stimulation wouldn't have to start from baby. It could just create a human and have them work through. And the idea is that we're basically continuing these life lessons. It's all about these types of lessons where we have free will, our actions cause reactions and problems, and then we learn from those. Whereas in the spirit world, we do whatever we want, nobody cares, there's no consequences, and we don't seem to learn as much in that regard.
And in your travels, have you figured out why, if you had that kind of unlimited omniscience and omnipotence, why we would limit ourselves other than learning?
I'm on the fence. As a soul teacher, I have soul students, and maybe because I work for the system, I have to kind of put on a brave face for the system. But I think that the people that have an argument like yours have a very strong argument. And it could be that we're reaching a point now where things could change, like the management might take a different direction. I think it's possible that, when I first read about the loosh theories and stuff like that, that they bring us here to kind of sweat us out, so to speak, and get us.
And that started with Robert Monroe, right?
Right. Ironically. And it's very clear that, he was sort of having a vision trying to explain why does Earth exist. And it was so they could get this little girl to start crying. And then Monsters, Inc., pushed on it, even if I don't even know if they were inspired by that. But I think there is that duality. I think that the lower energy beings do feed on our negative emotions, but when we have higher emotions, they can also be a food source, maybe to the lower energy beings, but maybe also to the higher energy beings. It's possible that in some ways we're recharging the bulb in the higher vibrations. That's a plausible theory too.
All right. Any final words for the audience?
Well, as I like to tell people, if you want to have experiences like mine or anything, try out all your psychic senses, try out lucid dreaming, try out out-of-body experiences, try out meditation, see what works for you. If anything, even a crack starts to work for you, just build on that. Build. And you never know what can happen.
All right. Thank you, Michael. It was an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you in the next episode.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, There's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.